Oficjalnie tak, ale jeżeli ktoś, jakaś osoba będzie bardzo chciała wziąć udział, to niech przyjdzie.
W porządku, bo to po 18 będzie.
Tak, tak, po 18, no.
Co, łączy się?
No właśnie nie wiem, gdzie tam Miriam coś tam poszła. Wysłała mi jeszcze raz ten link do...
No, spotkanie trwa. Włączona jest opcja udostępniania.
A jeszcze jak tu zrobić na przykład, żeby nie musiała być w poczekalni, żeby nie trzeba jej było wpuszczać?
Nie wiem. A daj mi usiąść na chwilę, zobaczę. Może opcja, gdzie tam to znalazłem.
Zaczynamy? Czy jeszcze chwilę?
Wiesz co, no to zależy. Łukasz Smoluk.
Być może się zmienić na mailach, bo ja ostatnio pisałam do asystentki
A to jest słowiańskie?
Tak,
Aha.
dokładnie. I nie wiem, czy się zdarzyło, że te maile gdzieś tam były forwardowane, czy tam dołączone, czy nie, ale mi się wydawało, że mogliśmy się przypadać na mailach.
A, no dobra, miło mi.
Miło mi.
Ale jest w ogóle Łukasz. Ale jesteś już członkiem naszej grupy.
Tak, dopiero co, tak.
Okej,
Wybierasz się do Nitry, złożyłeś?
she's here.
Mam nadzieję, że się wybieram.
Super, no to fajnie, to może się zobaczymy.
Hi.
Teraz będzie akurat chciał, więc...
Działy rzeczy. A ja z kolei myślę, że mogę być szybciej, bo o 18 jest tutaj rzeczy się mówią. Więc stwierdzam, że spotkałem się z okazji, bo przedstawić.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take seats because we start this session number 5. And we are obliged to make this session in English, give in English, perhaps because the topics are related to the non-European cultures. That is a case which demands English as contemporary international language, as in Latin, Greek in the past. So we have four papers dedicated to the non-European cultures. The first is by Dr. Łukasz Smoluk. He represents Musicological Institute at the Adam Mickiewicz University, but as a person, he represents clarity of thinking and energy in speaking. So that is certainly that we have a very good paper, especially that it is a result of brand new field research in Madagascar. So it's a fantastic topic. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for accepting my presentation. I'm trying to find a course. Okay. So maybe I will explain something about our expedition. Actually, this is the first conference paper about it. And I will try to make some first step of interpreting this material. Material is from expedition made last year in cooperation with Wrocław, Poznań, Słupsk and Vienna researchers. It was initiated by Bożena Muszkalska and August Schmidhofer. We made field work on the small island, Saint-Marie, near east coast of Madagascar. We researched a lot of areas of local music, traditional, popular, and today I will try to introduce you to Bingi Be. It's a ritual music performed on drums and rattles, with singing and dancing. What is Bingi Be? Musicians with whom we talked tended to agree on relating the term Bingi Be, literally meaning a large drum, to the music that is important component of many ceremonies. However, different people emphasized different elements of it. For some, the key feature was the timbre. This consists primarily of two elements. First is the loud sound of the two-headed bingi drum, or more specifically, at least two drums. They are made from large metal paint buckets with skin membranes and played with wooden sticks. The second element of the timbre is the rustling of the kayamba rattles. They are usually a small spray can filled with sand, seashells, small stones, or pieces of glass. For others, musicians, it was the structural factor that mattered. Rather than describing a bingi be, they preferred to provide a performative definition by tapping out a dance cross rhythm maintained at a fast tempo, like something like this. And it was normal reaction that what is bingi be? It's this. The rhythm is enclosed in 4-beat model, popular throughout whole Africa, with each main beat measuring of 3 equal pulsations. And we have some main patterns here used by drummers, like pam 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 pick 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 da da dum dum da da dum dum did it, and those different patterns are we can find in bingi and in kayamba rattles. An important component of bingi be music is singing, which takes place in a responsorial formula between the solist, Mbitsitsa, and the choir, Mpiosa. I will look this time at the place that bingi be occupies in Okatrarana ceremony. This is the animistic pre-Christian practice of exhumation and then reburial of human remains. On the island of Saint-Marie, this is done in the dry season, 4 or 5 years after the first burial. Ceremonies of this type are performed in many regions of Madagascar under the name Famadiana. Similar practices are present also in many parts of the world, including Indonesia, where they operate under the name manene. Many Malagasy, by the way, trace their origins to this part of Asia, to Indonesia. They treat it as a motherland, let's say. Let me quote the field note I made after the Okatrarana ceremony in the village of Ambaturao, 21st of July. I sit leaning against the tabletop, still stunned by what happened yesterday. Maybe not even the strangeness of the ceremony, but the sudden change of the tempo of events. The day started lazy, with an interview with the band manager, audiosphere recordings, packing. In the afternoon, however, things accelerated. It was confirmed that Okatrarana would be held in the Ambaturao, neighboring village. We had been invited to this event by the family of Stefan, the resolute Malgash, leader of the drumming group we had been recording for the past 2 days. After half an hour of insane tuk-tuk driving, we arrived at the site. And what we have seen at the site, let me show you the short movie material. It's too... I think it's that. Okatrarana is an... I have to... I was too loud, sorry. Okatrarana is an occasion for the entire clan to meet. Its members often come from very far away to honor the person who has died and spend time celebrating together. This time, the ceremony was organized by a wealthy family who could afford to invite dozens of people and prepare for them besa besa, a strong herbal alcohol drunk from wrapped palm leaves. The reburial ends of time of transition, in which the spirit of the deceased person, called Lolo, is wandering between the worlds of the living and the ancestors. A clean shirt, perfume, and a bottle of rum are placed in his new grave. The Lolo is therefore sent on his final journey. Okatrarana can be regarded then, following Arnold van Gennep's classical concept of rite of passage, as an end of a very strongly extended liminal phase. The first funeral excludes the person from the living community. From then, he or she functions outside of it, while not yet achieving full-fledged inclusion of the spirit world. This is the time when it is common for Lolo to communicate with the living. Islanders say that until Okatrarana is done, the Lolo is anxious. He cannot find a place. He wanders around. He may reveal himself in a dream, express his impatience that he is cold, that he has not yet been wrapped in a fresh cloth called lamba. The making of Okatrarana closes this period. It's the accumulating moment where the emotions accumulated over the years come into focus. All the ritual activities help to relieve them, and the collective songs and dances play a very special role. Let me now carefully follow the Okatrarana, paying particular attention to its soundscape. It's a very important factor in building the dynamics of the event. What happens in sound and music reflects the mood and shows the relationship of different groups involved into the ceremony. As we have seen before, the meeting was opened by the heads of the local community with a solemn speech, so-called kabare. The crowd sat on the headstones in silence while the speakers' voices carried across the forest meadow. The speeches were sometimes interrupted by applause. After them, young men began to serve beer and besa besa. The crowd became animated and hustle and bustle became louder and louder, competing with the rustling of sand from the grave digging that has just begun. After about half an hour, the remains of the older men were digged up, and over the course of the next 15 minutes, they were carefully placed into a concrete sarcophagus with the laughs and jokes of men. From the start, the participants of the ceremony were divided by gender, with the men dealing directly with the exhumation and the women sitting a little to the side. As the small sarcophagus was moved to its proper designated place, women singing and clapping gradually emerged from the crowd. The singing intensified, and the women sitting in a tight group passed photographs of the deceased to each other, some shrugging, others joking. Okatrarana, a seemingly joyous event, accumulates a whole range of emotions. The American anthropologist David Graeber once asked one of his interviews if Okatrarana, in his case it was Famadiana, were supposed to be such happy occasions, someone always burst into tears. She looked at him somewhat quizzically and pointed out that such people had often just had their father's corpse placed across their laps. "Well, how would you feel?" she asked. It is a good moment to look at the functions of music as described by Ellen Dissanayake in her article, Ritual and Ritualization. And the first of this that draws our attention is the function of relief from anxiety and psychological pain. Dissanayake writes that music, among other ritual practices, assures the safe passage of the deceased person's spirit to its ancestral home, provides an institutionalized outlet for individual pain, fear, grief, and anger. At the same time, reasserts group loyalties as members fulfill their ritual obligations. Another function described by Ellen Dissanayake is also important here. This is an establishment and maintenance of social identity through rites of passage. As she writes, ritual music not only creates emotional responses during individual segments of the ceremony, but organizes its overall time frame as well. Pulse, repetitions, change, and silence, elements that in music help to mark the passage of time, are carefully structured and give the ceremony a grace, flexibility, and logic felt by participants and audience alike. Let's go back again to our event from last July. As the women sang holding a picture of the deceased in their hands, several more graves were refreshed by wrapping the remains in the fresh cloth, lamba. Finally, the crowd formed a procession at the exit of the cemetery, which, headed by a photograph of the deceased, began to move slowly towards his family home. People tightly filled the entire space defined by the width of dirty road, and they were led by the sound of drums and the extremely charismatic woman singing, different from that on the cemetery, bolder, full of strength, coming out from bodies that fall into a dancing trance. The crowd metamorphosed into a single organism, absorbing us and carrying us away as if in a bubble that grew beyond time and space. The dance party continued for many more hours outside the home of the family of the deceased. Singing and dancing together to the drums was the culminating part of the Okatrarana ceremony. The entire clan, no longer divided into men and women, united, carried along by the music. The dead man, symbolized by a photograph, was present in the crowd, once again experienced the joy of life before moving forever to the world of spirits. The time of the collective dancing procession can be interpreted as the formation of communitas. It's the kind of collectiveness that, according to Victor Turner, belongs to the world of anti-structure. Its form in opposition to hierarchical structure, in sacred space, often in the world between, in a liminal state. In this case, on the border between the worlds of the living and the dead. And my last picture, last part, is a summary inspired by our discussions. I asked AI to generate the summary of this presentation. So we have 4 points. First, cultural significance. The Okatrarana ceremony underscores the deep cultural significance of communal practices in Madagascar. Then we have emotional catharsis. The ceremony provides a structured outlet for emotional expression through music, allowing participants to process grief, celebrate life, and achieve psychological relief. Then, ritual and identity. The Okatrarana ceremony exemplifies how ritual music not only evokes emotional responses, but also helps in establishing and maintaining social identity. And finally, liminality and communitas. The concept of liminality, as described by Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner, is vividly illustrated in the Okatrarana. The ceremony marks the transition from the liminal phase to the final inclusion of the deceased in the spirit world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this really fascinating contribution to the perhaps prehistory of humankind, of human being, because it's a Paleolithic, perhaps, epoch. But unfortunately, we should move forward with our papers. The discussion, as I know, is in the end of the session. So may I invite our next speakers, who are Miriam Na and on the remote style, Regina Reisinger. Both are curators of yes. So the Miriam is curator of a collection of instruments in the Stadtmuseum in Munich. Yeah. So please take the floor. I invite you. And perhaps the problems which will be presented are similar to this museum, just exactly this museum. This is a problem presentation of objects. Thank you.
If someone could just close it. Okay.
Yes.
No. Actually, Regina will share her screen, and she has
This here?
She.
This.
We need her. It's already working? No?
Oh, okay. To tym?
Is it working? Can you hear?
Yeah.
See the presentation? Lovely.
Ja, Regina, wir hören dich.
Schön. Hallo.
Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone. We are delighted to have been invited to speak here today. Unfortunately, Regina can't be with us, but she is joining remotely. Maybe Regina, yeah, you see her on the top. Great. Maria told us that there might not be a lot of knowledge about this region we are talking about, so we should make the presentation a bit broader than we announced in our abstract. Before we start, our disclaimer. So, what we will present in our talk are the following three fields. Firstly, we will give a brief introduction to the Pacific and its Sea of Islands by highlighting a handful of socio-cultural, geographical, and historical aspects. In a second part, we will shed light on how a German city museum was able to acquire such an important collection of non-European musical instruments. And the third and last part will then be dedicated to animistic cosmologies and their transformative potential for the museum space. I will give the word now to Regina.
Hello, also from my side. Let me know in case you can't see or hear anything well, but
Yes.
in case it works, then I'll give it a start. Since our research project on the provenance of the 125 musical instruments from the Pacific in the Münchner Stadtmuseum is just at the very beginning, we are also still in the process of acquiring knowledge about this multifaceted region and its multitude of cultures. In order to provide you with a brief introduction to the Pacific, I therefore opted for a handful of aspects that gave me a better understanding of the region. One of them was the realization that the approximately 20,000 to 30,000 islands of the Pacific are rather connected by the ocean than divided by water. Eurocentric maps, where the Pacific is split in half as if it was just an empty plain area, illustrate quite well this common misconception in the West. I'd like to quote here what country means to the elders of the Yolngu, a group of Aboriginal people from the northeast of Northern Territory in Arnhem Land. To talk of country means not just lands, but also the waters, the people, the winds, animals, plants, stories, songs, and feelings, everything that becomes together to make up place. Country is alive for us, it cares for us, communicates with us, and we are a part of it. A reciprocal relationship with country, as described here, is common in many indigenous communities in the Pacific. In several Pacific societies, like for example Hawaii, coconuts are seen and iconographically used as symbols of life, due to their nourishing and life-giving properties. Therefore, palm trees are also known as trees of life. The coconut's ability to float on ocean currents for thousands of kilometers over several weeks before washing ashore and sprouting new trees is another example of oceanic interconnectedness. Unfortunately, the Pacific currents did not only disseminate the tree of life on the islands. Due to environmental pollution, 3 garbage patches, consisting mostly of plastics and microplastics, merged in the northern Pacific. They spread over an estimated area of 1,006,000 square kilometers. Also, climate change poses an existential threat to the Pacific Islands as rising sea levels gradually submerge coastal communities, eroding land and displacing entire populations. Furthermore, the Ring of Fire shapes the region's landscapes and lives. It is a seismically active belt surrounding the Pacific Ocean and is home to frequent earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Apart from geographical and environmental circumstances and a mutual relationship to nature, seafaring is another crucial aspect that shapes and connects Pacific lives. Maritime navigation allowed for the settlement of this vast ocean, with skilled navigators using stars, ocean currents, and wind patterns to traverse great distances. Canoe building and wayfinding traditions facilitated trade, cultural exchange, and the spread of knowledge. These knowledge traditions were passed on orally over generations and led to admirable innovations in the arts and crafts of boat building and navigation. In the pictures here, you see a waka, a Maori warcraft canoe, and a nudra, a Fijian double canoe with a crab claw sail as an example. And below here, there is a map of the migratory paths of the Austronesian peoples over time. This leads me to the common distinction that is oftentimes used to refer to different language and cultural societies within the Austronesian peoples. There is Micronesia, meaning small islands. It includes countries and territories like the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Guam. Melanesia supposedly got its name from the attribution of darker skin to its inhabitants. It includes larger, more mountainous islands like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. Polynesia, meaning many islands, stretches from Hawaii over Samoa, Tonga, and Aotearoa, New Zealand to Rapa Nui, which is also known as Easter Island. Not part of the Austronesian language groups, but just as important to mention here are First Australians. This name applies to both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are the traditional custodians of Australia. Lastly, in my attempt to introduce you to the Pacific, I want to acknowledge the enduring impact of colonialism, particularly the intergenerational trauma it has caused, which continues to influence the region until the present day. Starting from the 16th century, European powers imposed new governance systems, often undermining indigenous leadership and traditions, missionary activity, altered spiritual and cultural practices while violating local cultural protocols and beliefs. European colonialism, carried out by the British, the French, the Dutch, and Germany, reached its peak in the second half of the 19th century. It disrupted local societies, introducing cash crops, slave labor, and resource extraction for foreign markets. Diseases brought by colonizers devastated populations, while land dispossession and forced relocations disrupted societies. Resistant movements emerged, but colonial rule left lasting legacies of inequality and dependence. Despite these challenges, Pacific communities adapted, preserving cultural identity and reclaiming sovereignty in the post-colonial era. Between 1884 and 1919, the colonial territory of Germany encompassed the northeastern part of Papua New Guinea, Samoa, and parts of Micronesia to a varying extent. Zooming into the colonial rule of Germany can, for example, provide us with an explanation of why there are so many musical instruments from Papua New Guinea, especially the Sepik area, in the music collection of the Münchner Stadtmuseum today. By showing you this photo here, I tried to come back to the previously mentioned coconut, but with an entirely changed meaning. The picture from the archive of the German Colonial Society depicts a coconut plantation where copra, the highly desired flesh of coconuts, was harvested. The dislocation and forced labor of indigenous people for the harvest of copra, palm oil, pearls, and bêche de mer was a common practice in the colonial exploitation under German rule. In our attempt to untangle possible colonial provenances of the musical instruments in our collection, we also want to ask ourselves how to become good custodians of the instruments while they are in our hands and care.
In Germany, the discussions surrounding the opening of the Humboldt Forum in Berlin in 2020 and 21 have sparked a heated debate about looted colonial artifacts in museums. The Ethnological Museum's Luftboot has become the symbol of this. Here, research questions and specialist debates that are otherwise at best confined to the arts pages of journals made their way into the headlines and into the center of society. But what do these major historical contexts and current discourses have to do with the boundaries of cosmologies within our museum? The answer is easy: everything. Let me thus briefly introduce you to our museum. The Münchner Stadtmuseum, yes, that it is, was founded in 1888 as a historical museum and is very centrally located in the Bavarian capital. With over 100 employees and several million artifacts, it is the largest municipal museum in Germany. Since the beginning of last year, we have been closed for a general refurbishment and expansion. After the planned reopening in 2031, we hope so, the exhibition space will be over 7,000 square meters. We have 10 independent collections which are gathered under our common roof, and one of them is the music collection. The history of this collection, which today comprises more than 6,000 instruments and sound objects, as well as several thousand volumes of literature and sheet music, several hundred phonographic cylinders, records, and other sound carriers, it can be traced back to the colorful personality of private collector Georg Neuner. Georg Neuner was born in Munich in 1904, the son of a chocolate manufacturer, and thus came from a very privileged middle-class background. His passion for music and ethnography was evident from an early age, so that his mother gave him his first instrument at the age of 9. He later recalled nostalgically, "In the beginning there was the Duld, which is a traditional Munich folk festival with a market where art and curiosities from all over the world were on sale." One of his earliest instruments, which he later labeled inventory number 1, is an impressive slit drum from the Sepik region of Papua New Guinea, which we see here. Neuner envisioned a sound museum based on the ideas and classifications of Kurt Sachs. By 1930, he already had 200 instruments on display in his parents' flat. We see an article from 1930. And by 1935, 5 years later, over 400 he showed in his first own apartment. The private collection was on everyone's lips. Neuner strove to institutionalize it and threatened the city government several times with emigration, for example, to Berlin. Neuner never studied. He was kind of a self-made man, but he had excellent contacts in local politics. As far as we currently know, the sources say nothing about him being an ardent Nazi. He was more of a typical fellow traveler who wanted to get the best for his collection and for himself. In 1940, Neuner's wish was finally fulfilled. The city council took over the objects, and Neuner was made the first director of the so-called Municipal Musical Instrument Collection. The official opening of the prestigious second museum building took place in October 1942 as part of the cultural week of the so-called capital of the movement. Perhaps the Nazi leadership wanted to build on the long tradition of Munich as a city of music with this new museum, also maybe in contrast to Berlin. That is possible or even probable, but we have no evidence. However, there are the gigantic acquisition budgets that enabled Neuner to multiply the number of objects during the war years. You see in really 42 and 43, it's going crazy. It's absolutely unbelievable. He now buys the first important European instruments, but above all, he greatly expands the holdings from Africa and Asia. The more than 120 ivory horns from the Belgian Congo, we see here some of them from the old exhibition, together with the associated correspondence, are the best proof of our thesis that the Nazi leadership used a large European network to trade in foreign currency and launder money under the disguise of innocent musical instruments. Due to the outsourcing of the most important objects, there were virtually no war losses when the building burned down in a bombing raid in 43, which we see on the left. After the war, the expansion of the collection continued, although never again on the same scale. In 1962, the city government decided to integrate the collection into the new extension to the city museum at Jakobsplatz, where it was given the top floor. On the right side, we see an article which announces the move there. Neuner's idea was now complete, but he did not live to see the opening. He died some month before, before the move. It's a great fortune to work with this really unique collection. As a reminder, we have about 6,000 instruments. The half is from Europe, and the other 3,000 are from really all around the world. And I have, this scheme to show you how they are dispersed. But it is, of course, also a difficult legacy. The entanglement of Nazi and colonial history makes provenance research necessary on several levels at the same time. We have been tackling this challenge since I took over the office 4 years ago, step by step, region by region, and you see we have really everything from everywhere. We are creating transparency and entering into dialogue with the communities of origin. Since my predecessor presented an extensive catalogue of our about 750 instruments from sub-Saharan Africa 10 years ago, we are currently concentrating on Oceania as the second region with a German colonial history. And also, which brings me to the third and final part of our presentation, on dealing with ensouled and otherwise culturally sensitive instruments. Regina, please.
Yeah, so at this point, we can also connect to the topic of the conference, boundaries. In our case, the research on the meaning and appropriate care of the so-called objects from the Pacific in our museum led us to the boundaries of our own worldviews and knowledge systems. The word cosmology is here used as the understanding how everything in the world and even the entire universe came into being and keeps emerging. In that sense, cosmology can be both the base of and produced by our worldviews and knowledge systems. I hope this little illustration makes that relationship a bit clearer that I had in mind when conceptualizing this talk. But to give more shape to this very abstract thought, I'd like to show you a recent example from January this year, where dissonances between Euro-Western and Maori cosmologies were resolved. The Taranaki Maunga, a volcano on Aotearoa, New Zealand's North Island, has been granted legal personhood, becoming the country's third natural entity to gain the same rights, duties, and protections as individuals. It will be represented by a collection of appointees from both iwi, which means tribe, and the crown. The Taranaki Maori representing Jamie Tuta describes this. When we think about the concept of personhood, what we're doing is putting in place a very Maori indigenous concept into Western law. When we view them as being ancestors, what we ultimately look to do is to see behavior change. Our mountain is and never was a crown asset. It is our ancestor, the living, breathing embodiment of our identity as Taranaki. This Maori perception of being in a continuous and mutual relationship with natural entities can be embedded into the conceptual framework of animism. On the other hand, there's the Euro-Western conception of a binary differentiation between objects and subjects, or nature and culture, which turns land into a property to be owned. With Philippe Descola, the latter can be called naturalism. I'll probably not be able to give you a full insight into all the dimensions of animism, but I'll give it a shot with a quote by the anthropologist Tim Ingold. Animism is often described as the imputation of life to inert objects. Such imputation is more typical of people in Western societies who dream of finding life on other planets than of indigenous peoples to whom the label of animism has classically been applied. These peoples are united not in their beliefs, but in a way of being that is alive and open to a world in continuous birth. What Ingold addresses here hits the mark of where I would like to head. When staying within the confinements of non-indigenous knowledge systems, like Western sciences, we might struggle to grasp indigenous cosmologies. Nevertheless, we should not fully neglect the term animism, especially because of its controversial history and reinterpretations over time. As an evolutionary anthropologist, Edward B. Tyler coined the term animism in the late 19th century. In line with evolutionary concepts of developmental stages, Tyler discredited animistic worldviews as primitive and on a lower stage. The deformation of animistic cosmologies was used as a negative template for the emerging modern age around 1900 that constructed itself by distancing from it. This fed into colonial legitimization strategies, such as the supposed civilization and cognitive superiority of the colonizers over the indigenous populations of the colonized territories. And this thinking also influenced the emerging ethnological museums in Germany at the end of the 19th century and their structures. So what has this to do with museums and musical instruments from the Pacific, you might ask? Until today, material entities like instruments are mostly considered to be objects within European museums, although their indigenous societies of origin oftentimes view them as ancestors or as animated beings. Therefore, I argue that we as museum workers should approach our sensitive heritage and engage with animistic thinking, just like it is already the case within environmentalist movements. Nevertheless, this is easier said than done, as we, who are not part of the societies of origin, can't be the ones to decide what is culturally appropriate and what is not. In an ideal world, we would be able to be in ongoing collaborations with the communities of origin to achieve that. In our case, being at the very beginning of our research, we often face our lack of knowledge, like in the case of a Maori flute, which is said to be made of a human upper leg bone, and therefore has to be treated with special sensitivity as an ancestral remain. So far, what we can do is, for example, not taking or distributing pictures of it. This is why you can just see the box here. I learned how to pronounce the language Te Reo Maori, so we could talk to the ancestor by translating German to Te Reo Maori with Google Translate. We also provided it with an own box, instead of letting it sit among other instruments. Furthermore, we will also opt for a non-invasive procedure to find out whether it is actually made of human or animal bone to respect Maori cultural protocols as much as possible. So, as you probably came in the hope to see musical instruments as well, I will conclude here by showing 3 outstanding instruments that are currently in our care. On the left, there is a livica, which is only known to exist and be played on the island of Northern Ireland. This is an island in the north of Papua New Guinea. It is played with wet hands, which stroke the slats above the hollow parts to produce a sound. On the right, there is the already mentioned slit drum from the Sepik regions. Slit drums can be used to communicate over long distances. And both instruments can also be used for rituals, and their sounds can be understood as voices of ancestors. So lastly, I want to come back to the coconut. And here you can see pieces of coconut shells threaded together to form a shark rattle from the Santa Cruz Islands, which is shaken underwater for shark fishing and is supposed to attract sharks by its sound. And I will end here on that note, and thank you very much for your attention and also for receiving us despite me not having been able to come in person. We would be very happy to hear your questions and especially your own thoughts, experiences and suggestions on the culturally appropriate care of sensitive and animate instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very rich report on the hard work of Europeans who not only wanted to be everywhere and govern everywhere, but also to collect and safeguard remnants of older non-European cultures. And also everybody should appreciate this tendency to give new life, to give new interpretation of the dead objects preserved in museums. So thank you very much once more. And now, I introduce my favorite collaborator, whom I am very happy to know more about Indonesia, and everything is. I am thankful for the David, for the David dissertation, because he introduced me also in this culture. So this is an example that a student, promoter, have I would say the gains of students. So, and this the text is a fragment, is an episode of his doctoral dissertation, and is highly professional analysis of relations between the Europeans and Indonesia, especially in the realm of gamelan. So, please take the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Dalik, for such a nice words. It is a great pleasure for me to be a part of this panel and to speak at our conference. Today, like usual, I will talk about Indonesian gamelan music, and to be more precise, I will talk about an important chapter of the history of the Western research on gamelan, research focusing on the practical aspect of this art, which became an important component of especially American ethnomusicology, thanks to Mantelhood, who at the beginning of the 1960s formulated the assumptions of the concept of bimusicality or alternative musicality In short, postulating that Western researchers studying non-European music should also learn it through practice. So in Mantelhood's opinion, any Western ethnomusicologist dealing with any non-Western musical tradition should develop at least some basic musical competence to be able to play the music that he or she is researching, of course, as a supplement to other methods used in the ethnomusicological research. For this purpose, a number of workshop groups were established at the University of California, where the students learned to play various types of gamelan from Java and Bali, and also other forms of Asian music under the guidance of Mantelhood, or also Asian teachers invited as guest lecturers to teach at UCLA. Soon, similar groups were established at other American universities, so Mantelhood was very successful in implementing his ideas, as it is confirmed in this short statement by anonymous American ethnomusicologist quoted by Neil Sorrell. Mantelhood started kind of methodological revolution, thanks to which his generation was the first generation of the Western ethnomusicologists researching on gamelan, being also able to play the instruments of the gamelan. What is important that it was this generation that began their academic careers after the end of World War II, when the old colonial order began to collapse, and with it the various racial and social barriers typical of colonial systems began to disintegrate as well. Naturally, many of such boundaries also existed in colonial Indonesia, and they seem to be the main factor that over the years has prevented Europeans living in Indonesia, living in the colony, from playing the gamelan. Simply speaking, learning to play native instruments could be seen by other Europeans as something inappropriate. Moreover, to play gamelan, you need other people. You cannot do it by yourself. And playing the gamelan is always a collective activity, and making music with the natives could be seen as a form of interaction with them that probably went too far, according to people of that times. And what is the most important, placing the native musician in the position of a teacher instructing an European how to play, giving orders to the European. At that time, it was something hard to accept. It would be a complete inversion of the social ladder of the colonial society. Despite this, in the history of gamelan research, we can find examples of individual Europeans who already in the colonial times tried to combine their scientific interest in Indonesian music with the practice. The first one that we know was Adrian Valeravenhole, who arrived to Java as a child with his parents and other members of a rich Dutch family that went to Indonesia to run a tea plantation in Parakan Salak village on the slopes of the Mount Salak volcano in West Java. Grown up, Adrian became the administrator and later the owner of this family business. While living in Java, both Adrian and his brother Karel Frederick Hole developed strong interest in local Sundanese culture. Karel Frederick was interested mainly in the linguistic issues. He published several books on this subject. And due to his extensive knowledge, he was even appointed by the colonial government as a honorary advisor of the native affairs, while his brother Adrian became interested mostly in Sundanese gamelan music. Both brothers maintained very close relations with the local people. They were close to the workers of their plantation and cared deeply about their welfare by building for them a number of facilities in the village, including a mosque. Moreover, Adrian purchased a gamelan set named Sari Oneng to be played by the plantation workers during their free time, and Adrian himself also joined the ensemble and learned to play gamelan instruments. Gamelan became his great passion, and as we can read in one of the letters written by his cousin Edward Jules Kerkhoven, who shortly after his arrival to Java in 1861 reported that Adrian has been practicing new pieces with his orchestra for 4 days, starting at 8 in the morning and playing until midnight, which was a little bit annoying for the author of this letter. The photo that you can see on the screen was taken in 1862 by Karl Friedrich Holle, and it shows Adrian Holle making music with plantation workers. Adrian plays the rebab here, which is considered as the most technically difficult instrument of the gamelan to play, and it is seen also as the melodic leader of the ensemble. According to the gamelan musicians, according to the tradition, the rebab is the Raja, or the king of the gamelan, but despite this, all musicians have equal status in the ensemble, and for that reason they all should sit cross-legged on the floor. But here we can see Adrian Holle sitting on a chair, and thus his position is higher than the others. We don't know whether Holle broke this rule intentionally, but with all his sympathy for the Sundanese people, this photo still perfectly reflects the hierarchy of the society of the colonial Indonesia. Due to his proficiency in playing gamelan, other European researchers of Indonesian music have considered Adrian Holle to be the foremost authority on the music of the West Java, although, as far as I know, he never published a book or even a single article on that matter. He still contributed to the development of research on gamelan by sharing his knowledge with other scholars. He spent his last year back in Europe, where, basing only on his memory, he wrote down transcriptions of several gamelan pieces in the form of the scores. One of them was later published in the book The Gamelan de Yogyakarta, written by Isaac Honeman, which is considered as the most comprehensive study on gamelan before the publication of Tonkunst van Java by Jaap Kunst. Adrian Holle passed away in 1879, but the Sarioneng gamelan continued to be active. Next manager of the Parakan Salak plantation, that was his brother-in-law, Gustav Mundt, decided to promote the company's products in Europe by participating in large industrial exhibitions. For this purpose, he sent the Sarioneng gamelan to perform, among others, at the International Colonial and Export Exhibition in Amsterdam in 1883, and above all, at the World Exhibition in Paris in 1889, where gamelan became the biggest attraction of the event. It was a milestone for the reception of gamelan music in the West, and it was the Sarioneng gamelan that Claude Debussy actually heard in Paris. From the perspective of time, Adrian Holle may be considered as one of the pioneers of bimusicality. During his life, he certainly broke many social barriers introduced by the colonial system. Being a member of his elite himself, coming from a wealthy European family with connections among the highest colonial officials, he still decided to socialize not only with the natives, but with the natives from the lowest social class, with ordinary workers and simple farmers. He could probably do so. He could probably dare to do so because Parakan Salak was a place located in a rather isolated rural area. Maybe it was far enough from the curious eyes and tongues of other Europeans living in Java. Speaking about the boundaries within the colonial society, it should be emphasized that not all of them were introduced by the colonizers. Some taboos, excluding outsiders from participation in specific events or from observing specific customs, ceremonies, or performances, were also elements of the local culture. This was also the case of many places in Indonesia, including Java, where the kratons, the courts of local rulers, which were also the centers of the Javanese culture, until the mid-19th century were a rather closed, hermetic environment. Therefore, only the aristocrats, only the relatives of the king, and only his servants were allowed to study and to perform specific forms of gamelan music and dance, which could be presented only in the space of the kraton. This, however, began to change after the fall of uprising led by Prince Diponegoro against the Dutch in 1830. As a consequence, the Sultan of Yogyakarta and the King of Surakarta lost the remains of their political power, and their kratons were forced to open up to the outside world. The aristocrats themselves also slowly began to undergo gradual westernization. They adopted some elements of the Western culture, including also the music. Both the rulers of Surakarta and Yogyakarta decided to form Western orchestra at their courts. And in 1924, the Sultan of Yogyakarta entrusted this task to a young German artist, later very famous primitivist painter, Walter Spies, who just arrived to Java a few months before. And he was also an amateur musician and a talented pianist. During his work in Kraton, Spies managed to create an orchestra of about 40 musicians, able to play classical repertoire as well as military marching music, dance music, or even jazz. Walter Spies worked in the service of the Sultan of Yogyakarta for 4 years. As a servant of His Majesty Hamengkubuwono VIII, he was allowed to stay in the Kraton, and he used this opportunity to study in his free time the music of the royal gamelans, which fascinated him. He also learned to play some of the gamelan instruments from Prince Joyodipuro, who was an outstanding artist, dancer, and musician, privately the Sultan's brother-in-law, and one of the informants working closely with Jaap Kunst. As we know, Jaap Kunst didn't play gamelan, but Walter Spies broke this boundary. Spies, who lived in Joyodipuro's residence, which is a part of the Kraton complex, actively participated in the rehearsals of his gamelan orchestra. And at the same time, Joyodipuro also collaborated with another European interested in gamelan, an Austrian composer, Sieglinde Hofland-Leiber, also known as Linda Bandara, who conducted research on gamelan at another court in Yogyakarta, Pakualaman, which has the status of a minor court ruled by the Prince Paku Alam. Spies started to work with Hofland-Leiber, and both Europeans, together with Joyodipuro, they began to make transcriptions of the gamelan pieces performed in Pakualaman, putting them into the scores, which were appreciated by Jaap Kunst due to their documentary value, but at the same time, Jaap Kunst opposed their use in didactic practice to avoid standardization of so-called panerusan parts, which are in gamelan practice to some extent improvised. Spies and Hofland-Leiber also conducted very interesting musical experiments. For example, retuning the white keys of the piano to the 7 tones of the Pelog scale of the gamelan, and the black keys to the 5 tones of the Slendro scales, then putting the piano together with gamelan and playing together with the gamelan musicians from Pakualaman. Both Spies and Hofland-Leiber created later their own compositions inspired by the gamelan. In the case of Walter Spies, these were few pieces written for piano. In 1927, Walter Spies decided to settle down in Paradise Island of Bali, in the village of Ubud. He focused on painting and soon became one of the most prominent figures of the cultural life of the Dutch East Indies. However, he did not abandon his passion for the performing arts, being particularly interested in Balinese dance, which resulted in, among others, the publication of the famous book Dance and Drama in Bali, co-authored with Beryl de Zoete. Just like in Java, in Bali, Walter Spies also worked closely with the native artists, contributing to the development of the local arts. For example, Spies is often credited as a co-creator of the Kecak dance, which became one of the must-see tourist attractions of Bali. Spies, in collaboration with Balinese dancer and choreographer Wayan Limbak, had transformed old ritual trance dance Sanghyang, traditionally performed during the village purification rituals, into a form of a dance drama presenting the stories from the epic of Ramayana. What is interesting, Walter Spies and Wayan Limbak, they did it for the purposes of a German documentary movie, Insel der Dämonen, Island of the Demons, from 1933, created by Friedrich Dalsheim and Baron Victor von Plezen, both known from their ethnographic films from different regions of the world. But soon after this film, the Kecak dance, as we know, began to start to live its own life. Finally, Walter Spies also contributed to research and documentation of the Balinese gamelan music by being the guide and advisor of the Odeon team sent to Bali to make the recordings for the famous Musik des Orients series compiled by Erich von Hornbostel. In fact, all that they have recorded in Bali was based on the selection done by Walter Spies. Walter Spies died during World War II in 1942 while being on a board of a ship bombed by a Japanese aircraft. But as a painter, a researcher, composer, also musicologist, he left a rich legacy, and for sure already in his times in the colonial era he became a cultural bridge builder between Indonesia and the West. I know that I'm running out of my time, so at the end I would like to just mention one more name, Bernard IJzerdraad, who was a Dutch ethnomusicologist, later became even an Indonesian citizen and changed his name to Suryo Broto. Same as Mantelhood, he was one of the Jaap Kunst students, and already during World War II, still as a teenager, he founded his own gamelan orchestra, Babar Layar, in which he played together with his friends from his hometown Arnhem. It was the first ever gamelan ensemble composed entirely of the Europeans, and working closely with Jaap Kunst, he labeled the Babar Layar Orchestra as a study group for gamelan music, and probably he was the one who has directly inspired Mantelhood ideas of bimusicality, and also the concept of gamelan workshops introduced and developed later at UCLA by Mantelhood. If you are going to publish our papers later, I will be more than happy to share you more information about activities of Bernard IJzerdraad in the PDF version of my paper. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, David, very much for your highly competent talk about the attractive power of Indonesian culture to European. I must say, I forgot to say that David also working in the Indonesian embassy in Warsaw leads also a gamelan workshop at the Institute of Musicology, Warsaw University, what is very much important, because gamelan teaches to carefully listen to each other. And this is a badly needed attitude in contemporary society. So may I introduce our last speaker, Dr. Christopher Bellingham. I remember your lecture at the university about 3 years ago, and it was an excellent lecture, deeply rooted in classical American anthropology of music. So I am also very grateful to this, to your initiative to give lecture for students at the university. And the problem which will be presented by Christopher is fusion and exclusion. Also topics up to date very much. So please take the word.
Thank you very much. I've been studying tassa drumming in Trinidad and Tobago for quite a long time, I guess. And I've been trying to move away from it, but this time I'm coming back. But I will start with a bit of philosophizing, I guess, at the beginning. So, sounds are not things. At least not like a cat or a pencil is a thing. Rather, sounds are vibrational events that are set in motion by some action, have duration, and then end. Importantly, sounds cannot be easily contained. They resonate beyond their source, mix with other sounds, and set other vibrations in motion. And, of course, noise is a special category of sound, namely sounds we've been trained to ignore, according to Murray Schafer. Noise need not be loud, but it is by definition intrusive. Since the 1920s, for example, automakers have worked to make the car an acoustic cocoon, where riders are increasingly isolated from the exterior environment. This cocooning is also happening on a broader social level, evidenced by effective soundproofing in modern buildings, and more importantly, through sound abatement laws that often control unwanted noise by regulating the sound-making activities of minorities, immigrants, and other relatively powerless groups of people. Schafer rather offhandedly declares that modern man is at last becoming concerned to clean the sludge out of his ears and regain the talent of clairaudience, clean hearing. But who decides what is noise and at what cost? Music is, of course, another special category of sound. Just as sound cannot be easily contained in space, so too does music actually and metaphorically resonate beyond its source, mix with other musics, and set new musics in motion. Where sound resonates according to the laws of physics, music's perception and reception operate within personal and social realms. In this way, music reflects and makes audible the rules that govern society, as composers and musicians create and people consume music according to sets of socially accepted rules and technologies. Therefore, exclusion, inclusion, and fusion of musical styles reflect the manufacture of society, as authorities work to control music production while those lacking power push back. Within such social confrontations, music is powerful, subversive, transformational, and transcendent. The musical sounds of post-colonial societies in particular are the product of past and ongoing negotiations of power, both vertically and laterally. While some musics have been erased, others have been incorporated or appropriated, as the case may be, within other styles, fused in ways that reflect past and present relationships between and among groups of music makers. With attentive listening, we can hear music as an archive of historic, current, and potential relationships between people and ideas. In this paper, I sketch some thoughts in this regard related to tassa drumming in Trinidad and Tobago, where I've done field work since 2007, and where there are two primary ethnic groups, those descended from enslaved Africans and those descended from indentured Indians. Enslaved Africans came to Trinidad in large numbers beginning in the late 1700s, and as slavery was abolished in the 1830s, a new system of labor emerged that brought indentured or contracted workers from India. Today, each group comprises about half the country's population, making for a small nation divided ethnically, culturally, and politically. At the time of Trinidad and Tobago's independence from Britain in 1962, political power was largely held by African Trinidadian leaders who promoted African Trinidadian culture as the foundation of a national creolized or mixed cultural identity, paradoxically narrowly defined as a fusion of African and European culture only, expressly excluding Indian Trinidadians and other groups. The state subsidized and promoted African Trinidadian musics, for example, calypso and steel pan, through competitions and other programs, thereby cementing their preservation and development as a priority of the state. This policy has had broad and long-lasting implications, in part determining which musical styles, musicians, and performances can meaningfully participate in the inscription of national identity and therefore access to state resources. Most relevant at present, this gatekeeping meant that Indian Trinidadian musics were excluded from the nationalist project until very recently, an exclusion that reflects Indian Trinidadians' enduring status as cultural outsiders, despite their nearly 200-year presence in the region. Careful listening allows us to understand music as an archive, and I specifically suggest that tassa drumming encapsulates Indian Caribbean history and identity while simultaneously reflecting processes of cultural and musical exchange between Indian and African Trinidadians. In other words, even though tassa is an Indian thing, it nonetheless reveals processes of cultural mixing that goes against social and political assumptions that African and Indian cultures are incompatible, separate, and incapable of reconciliation. The music, in fact, tells us a different story. Through its historical trajectory, tassa illustrates both the exclusion of Indian Trinidadian music from the nationalist canon and the inevitable processes of fusion that occur when musical traditions interact. While tassa's roots lie in North India, its sound and performance context have transformed in ways that reflect both resistance to marginalization and adaptation within the broader Caribbean soundscape. Examining these shifts provides insight into how music can serve as both a battleground for cultural legitimacy and a bridge between communities. Trinidadian tassa is derived from South Asian dol tasha, an ensemble that takes many different forms throughout present-day India and Pakistan. This style was transformed in the Caribbean in such a way that a tassa band today includes at least 4 musical parts: a lead tassa drum called a cutter, a supporting tassa drum called fule, a bass drum, sometimes called dol, and the hand cymbals called jal or janj sometimes. Together, these parts create specific composite rhythms called hands, H-A-N-D, hands. Hands may differ from one another in a number of ways, including but not limited to a different bass line, a different fule, the presence or absence of certain musical sections, or a variety of other factors. Most importantly, for the present discussion, all commonly performed hands are adapted from other musical sources. In other words, all traditional music played on tassa has been taken from rhythms distilled from other musical genres, some in the distant past and others more recently. I'll discuss a few examples to illustrate this point and discuss how such adaptation reflects processes of migration, integration, and creolization. Generally speaking, tassa is a music for dancing and for accompanying important processions. As such, one of the most common performance contexts for tassa is Hindu weddings, where the bride's and groom's respective entourages require processional music and where guests look forward to dancing to tassa at various points throughout the 3-day set of rituals. One of the most common dancing hands is called nagara. The name nagara refers to a different but related pair of drums called nagara or nakara in North India, where it accompanies dancing or even singing in a variety of musical genres. In the neighboring country of Suriname, the neighboring to Trinidad, country of Suriname, where many thousands of Indians were also transported during the indenture period, Nagara drumming remains a vibrant tradition. Meanwhile, in Trinidad and Tobago, Nagara drumming has disappeared, though the rhythms of Nagara are preserved within the Tassa ensemble. In the following clip, for comparison, we'll hear a Surinamese Nagara drummer followed by a Trinidadian Tassa band playing the same hand called Nagara. Can you go louder? And in Trinidad? So Nagara hand for Tassa represents direct continuities with India. In the next example, called Calypso hand, we'll look at how Tassa has absorbed African Trinidadian musical ideas. First, though, I want to take a look at the naming system for the Tassa drums. Recall that the lead drum is called the cutter, and the supporting drum is called the fule. As you might guess, these are not Hindi or Bhojpuri words. In fact, they're adapted from Afro-Caribbean drumming terminology. Cutter is an anglicized version of the word kata, a commonly used word to name Afro-Caribbean percussion instruments. The word ka, for example, is also a generic word for drum in Guadeloupean Creole. For example, in guoka, or the big drum tradition. In related styles in Trinidad, kata refers to the lead drum in African Trinidadian drumming ensembles played for stick fighting competitions and as a lead part in the early 20th century Tambu bamboo ensemble. Likewise, fule, fula, or bula are common names for supporting Afro-Caribbean drums. This perhaps derives from French by way of French-based Creole, where refoule means to repulse or to drive back or to support in some way. As such, it's clear that the Tassa ensemble has taken up an African Trinidadian nomenclature to describe its lead and supporting drums, and perhaps along with it strengthen the very idea of having a lead and a supporting drum, as in West African drumming traditions. Now back to Calypso. By the early 20th century, an African Trinidadian song style called Calypso had become the most important music for carnival. Among other elements, Calypso is defined by a habanero-style bass part with syncopated rhythms in the melody and supporting parts. By the 1940s, the newly invented steel orchestra quickly became an important part of carnival music making, with such orchestras often playing Calypso while parading through the streets. In the following example, we'll hear a clip of the Calypso called Jean and Dinah, sung by the Calypsonian Mighty Sparrow. Then we'll hear the same song played on a steel orchestra while it's parading through the streets during Carnival. Both examples are from 1956, and please forgive my low-tech transcription. So this is two examples, the Calypso, Jean and Dinah, and then that song played on the steel orchestra while it's moving through the streets. So just listen for the strumming pattern, or if you can imagine the quattro or the guitar strumming the supporting part, and then the bass, in this case, the basic habanero bass, dum, 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 dum. In this case, they've added a little dum, 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 right? So these are those two things.
Well, the girls in town feeling bad. No more Yankees in Trinidad. They're gonna close down the base for good. Them girls have to make out how they could. Brothers now they pop up in tongue. In for a penny and in for a pound. Billy me it's competition for so trouble in the tongue with the price drop low. So when you bounce up, Gina and Dinah, Rosita and Clementina, from the corner posing that you like is something they say. Now you catch them broke, you can get them all for nothing. Don't make a row. The Yankees
Now the steel orchestra just repeats the refrain, so you're only going to hear the refrain in this part. Now, contemporary recordings of tassa from the same period, from the 1950s, document a tassa hand that was likely recently adapted from the rhythms of calypso, distilled from those played by the steel orchestra. In this, what is today commonly called calypso hand by tassa drummers, the bass drum approximates the steel orchestra's habanero rhythm, while the fule and the jol sound out the rhythmic accompaniment. And in this example, we'll hear the calypso hand from, I believe it's 1956, and then we'll hear a modern version of the same hand. And you can see just how similar it is, generations apart. Difficult to hear, but Can you hear that? So this is one example of how Indian Trinidadian drummers adapted African Trinidadian musical elements, and importantly, they did so according to the musical structures of tassa. So they used the logic of tassa to adapt other exogenous elements into their music. The very last example is more performative and practical, I guess. In a time when folk music performance has lost appeal for many young people, tassa drumming is more popular now than perhaps ever before. Since the 1990s, tassa bands have become increasingly professionalized as expectations of musical prowess have risen dramatically. Formal competitions have driven these changes, incentivizing showy arrangements of standard repertoire, including, for example, Nagara, Calypso, and other common hands, while also driving innovation, including the creation of new repertoire and the inclusion of both women and non-Indian performers. Regarding the latter, we have Bausimba entertainers. This tassa band is unique in a number of ways. First, they are from Tobago, where there are relatively few tassa bands compared to hundreds in Trinidad. Second, the group is composed entirely of African Trinidadians. It's not uncommon for African Trinidadians to play tassa, and in fact, it's quite likely that Indian and African drummers have been exchanging ideas for generations. But it is really unheard of to have an entirely non-Indian band. Why? Because tassa is generally passed down from generation to generation within families, from father to son, uncle to nephew, etc. A good example is Malik Tassa Drummers, founded in the 1960s by Sugram Ram Kasun and his son Krishna Sugram Ram and other relatives. By the 1980s, Krishna had taken leadership of the band, which at that time consisted of himself and his 3 sons. Krishna passed away a few years ago, and now his son is in charge, right? So it's still called Malik Tassa Drummers, and there's this direct continuity generation after generation. Because of this tradition of musical transmission, the only way for African Trinidadians to learn tassa is for the traditional means of teaching and learning to be disrupted. In this case, the Bausimba entertainers were already well versed in what is locally called African drumming, and picked up Tasa here and there until recently they engaged my mentor, my teacher, Lini Kumar, as their teacher. And I always want to mention every time I come to this museum, those of you who are here the very first time, thank you, Maria, Lini and I came here to make our Polish debut in 2019, I think, right? So he's been here before. He has a legacy. Their ethnic identity has played an important role in the context and variety of performances they're able to access. While Bausimba have indeed been hired for weddings, they largely perform for cultural functions, especially those that aim to highlight Trinidadian multiculturalism. And one such venue is the national Tasa competition called Tasarama, where they competed for the first time in 2014. Since its inception, Tasarama has been an important center of Indian Trinidadian music and culture, an event built by and largely for Indian Trinidadians. Yet the performances in the competition very often center on the celebration of multiculturalism. Though Tasa is indeed, as I said, regarded as an Indian thing, there is a recognition in Tasarama performances that national belonging is prefixed on cultural mixing, on being Creole. As such, bands often celebrate this diversity through a variety of acted or danced scenes while the band plays at the back of the stage. The same is true of Bausimba at the 2014 Tasarama. But given their outsider status as African Trinidadian drummers, their performance introduced unique tropes on the theme of multiculturalism. Most Tasarama performances approach multiculturalism from an Indian Trinidadian perspective, privileging Indian-themed costumes, Indian dancers, and themes related to Hindu weddings. Bausimba did those things, but reinterpreted them in interesting ways. First, all performers on the stage were non-Indian, with most of them wearing Indian-style dress. This includes both the drummers and the dancers, who for the most part danced in an Indian Trinidadian style, like a Bollywood style, yeah? This, of course, stays true to the roots of Tasa and the Tasarama competition, but sent a very direct message to the audience. We may be black, but we respect and honor your traditions. The overall theme of the performance centered on a dramatic interpretation of a wedding, a very traditional venue for Tasa drumming and a common trope in Tasarama performances. But this wedding is different. While we hear with the Tasa and see references to a Hindu wedding, the bride is black, wearing an Indian wedding sari, and the groom is black. But given his manner of dress and movement on stage, we're meant to understand that he is not Hindu. So let me repeat this, just so we know. She is, of course, a black person. She's an African Trinidadian person. But we're meant to understand in the narrative that she is Indian. She, in fact, has just arrived on the boat from India. It literally says from India to Tobago, right? So they're retelling the story of Indian and African arrival to the Caribbean. Through such references, what we are witnessing is a metaphorical marriage of cultures, Indian and African, a true coming together of Creole culture acted out by African performers in the overall context of an Indian cultural competition. So in the following clip, we'll see bits of this scene where the drummers play Nagara hand, which we just heard, while the bride dances in an Indian style and the groom dances in an African style. They eventually break the contrivance of a Hindu wedding context by jumping the broom, a reference to a West African matrimonial tradition that remains a common element of Black Atlantic folklore. And here we see that section. So this is the wedding, the Hindu wedding. A break of the music, and now we switch to jumping the broom. Note the audience's response. An audience almost entirely of Indian Trinidadians scream out their approval for this creolized wedding scene, right? To end the performance, I'm going to go off script and tell you what's happening. They end the performance with an African rhythm that they adapt for Tassa. You can see the bass drum is no longer played like this, but it's turned this way, and he's playing this direction, which is kind of an indication to the audience that now we're doing something African. And in this scene, the Indian bride who's just got married comes back on stage. The groom tries to teach her this dance called the bele. Bele is this Afro-Creole dance. She can't do it at first. She can't move her legs properly to do the African dance. And then someone comes out and puts on this Creole dress, and then she spins in circles, and suddenly she dances perfectly, right? So there she is, dancing perfectly. So here's the finale. So, of course, the point is clear. Trinidad and Tobago is a Creole culture. Despite political animosities that still today are largely divided along racial lines, at the grassroots level, cultures, ethnicities, and religions have been mixing for generations. To conclude, right? Though excluded from official inscription as a national symbol like the steel pan, Tassa nonetheless embodies the complex fusion of Caribbean creolization. While it remains culturally coded as Indian, its rhythms reveal a deeper history of exchange, challenging rigid distinctions between African and Indian musics in the Caribbean. Yet this fusion has largely unfolded on Indian terms, as Tassa remains tied to Hindu weddings and Indian Trinidadian celebrations. The state's promotion of calypso and steel pan as nationalist symbols, meanwhile, rendered other traditions like Tassa as peripheral noise, reinforcing hierarchies that sidelined Indian Trinidadians from cultural and political power. Antonio Benitez Rojo's conceptualization of creolization as a discontinuous series of recurrences helps us hear Tassa not as a static tradition, but as a living archive, a rhythmically layered record of forced encounters, creative adaptations, and unresolved tensions. Performances like those of the Balsimba entertainers dramatize this process, staging a metaphorical marriage of African and Indian traditions while exposing the limits of state-sponsored multiculturalism. Music then becomes more than sound. It is an embodied memory of colonial intimacies and a subversive counter-archive, one that reverberates with the past even as it rhythms toward an ever-creolizing future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Of heterogeneous, complex heritage, history, can contribute, can form the cultural uniqueness well balanced. So it's a fantastic result and very optimistic result of this culture exchange and frequently sad history. So thank you very much once more, Chris. And we have for very important contributions about the confronting European and non-European attitudes. So this is a fascinating topic for discussing, to make confessing of our attitudes towards the non-European cultures. So I open the discussion and I invite very heartily your talks, your opinions, to express your opinions.
I can start. A question or a comment for David, maybe.
Oh, yes.
I can use this. Yeah, I can use this. Yeah? Yeah, okay. I don't know. Maybe I don't have to say it, but I'm reminded also of Colin McPhee. And one thing that comes to mind is Trance and Dance in Bali. This film. What's her name? The anthropologist who made the film. You know what I mean, yes? Okay, anyway, there is this documentary film made in the 1930s by a super famous anthropologist. Someone knows her name, I just forget her name. And Colin McPhee, his music was the soundtrack for the documentary film, right? So the film was documenting the Baris dance in Bali, and the actual soundtrack was Colin McPhee's music, which, if we think about these interesting layers of encounters between Europe and Indonesia, I think that's an amazing one. That here we have, you know, an ostensibly true account of something that really happened, but of course in the 1930s, they were using cameras without sound in this case. And so in post-production, they inserted sound, but it was Colin McPhee's arrangement, played on gamelan, yes, but still completely disconnected from the dance. Yeah. So I don't know if it's just a comment that came to mind while I was.
It was also the case of the Island of the Demons that
Yes.
I have mentioned. When Walter Spies watched that movie, he was so angry because they used in the soundtrack the recordings of gamelan, but it was totally different than we could see on the screen. And actually Colin McPhee was also a collaborator of Walter Spies. They used to work together, and also they played together Balinese music transcribed for two pianos, and they performed it in Bali in the local society. It was the European club.
Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, who made these films in the 1930s, but they weren't published till much later. So anyway,
Thank you.
very good. Yeah.
So other contributions, other opinions, please. Oh, Thomas.
Thank you all for the interesting, inspiring reports in this session. And Łukasz, could I ask in Polish? It would be easier, and you can answer, of course, in English, if you want. Czy masz jakieś przemyślenia na temat rejestracji filmowej tego obrzędu Okatrarana? Czy to mogło według Ciebie zmienić zachowanie ludzi? Ja rozumiem, że to jest takie pytanie trudne być może, więc w tej łatwiejszej wersji, jeżeli trudno będzie odpowiedzieć, jak czuliście się filmując i jak ludzie reagowali przed kamerą? Bo byliście jedynymi chyba filmującymi, prawda?
Should I answer in English? Okay. We were invited there by our friend, and it's not normal to be there, for white people to be there during the Okatrarana or Famadiana or any version of this ritual. So we were aware of this, so we just put our stuff in the distance, like our tripods, cameras, and so on. And we just heard the whispering that, oh, journalists, they came and they will like do something. But it was a quick consulting between our friends who were from this clan, like the member of this like whole family. Between him and the head of the village, they just had a quick conversation, and then suddenly they just grab us and put like very close to the grave and tell us, film, making photos, it's like you are our guests. And it was like totally changed, the situation totally changed. And then we wanted to explain all this situation with them, and they told us that it's not usual that we have white guests, so it was a like extra thing for our ceremony. It was something big, something like really important. So that's why we could like be so close, and I felt really strange with it. I didn't expect that we will be so close, and I will see all of this with like 2 meters from the skeleton, like grabbing the parts of human body and into the sarcophagus, and whole this situation was really, really strange for us. But we get some besa, this rum, and everything was more like, maybe not normal, but more okay for us. So yeah, so like answering to your question, it wasn't problem filming. It wasn't problem for them. They filmed also by their iPhones and so on, but it was like we had to like consult it a little bit with them, that we are here, we are okay, and we just want to make some research, some documentation, and yeah, that's all. Thank you for this question.
Are there any comments more? Because it's these 4 contributions were, I would say, revolutionary for our discipline.
I would like to make a comment on your presentation of you and Regina. Yes, so I'm really very impressed by what I have seen and heard. Unfortunately, I have not been to Munich, to this museum, but I put it on my list.
Is it closed now?
But I want to express also my impression of, in general, the German, the attitude of German society towards the collections they store in many museums. Like, for example, in the museum in Berlin, I visited the collection which was previously held in Dahlem and now has been moved to Humboldt, to the city center. And I visited it many times, almost 25 years ago, when it had been in Dahlem. And I noticed that changed recently, like 5 years maybe ago, in Humboldt Center. Some of the places on the display, on the exposition, were empty. I don't remember how many, but several places were empty. There were no objects there, and there was this inscription that this item has been restored to the place of origin, to the previous owner. And the German museums, they are, for me, wonderful, because they are always, they have always this goal of education, of dialogue with the visitors. And for example, there are sometimes on the exhibition displays of educational type. And I remember in Berlin, in Humboldt, there was a bookshelf, and there were many books on the shelves. And some of the books were enveloped, they were packed in a transparent envelope, so you could see what is inside, the title, but there was written on it, attention, there is a racist content in it, or a colonial speech in the book, so be aware of it. And it was, the goal was to show and to make people reflect about how many such books could we have on our shelves or in our libraries. My second profession is librarian, so I'm very sensitive to that problem. So how many books do we still have which contain this this kind of speech, this mentality, colonial mentality? So I'm really impressed how German society acts just for to make people reflect on it. So thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, and I'm still impressed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this comment. Yes, dziękuję. It's the only word I can remember in Polish. But let me just say 2 words, if we have the time, I don't know, before the concert, because I think it's not all Germany, it's not every museum. The Humboldt Forum is the example I chose because it is really, I don't know if these discussions arrived really in Poland. It's not so far, but I don't know. And even in Germany, yeah, Humboldt Forum is really a big story and a really difficult story. And yeah, there are things given back, yes, to communities, but all which is around this, we had this, yeah, kind of with Nigeria and Namibia, and it's not easy. I think the most important thing is this change of generation in curatorship. This is also what I see in our museum. Before you had generations, decades of kind of small kings in their kingdoms, and I don't give anything back and it's mine. And yeah, maybe also we are more and more women. Like, I think in my museum we are 80% women now. And some say it's also a kind of female perspective of, yeah, but it's another discussion maybe. Yeah, but I think the change of generation is the most important. But with political changes now, and we will see what happened. But because at the moment, our project, for example, Regina can't be here, to be clear, because we have granted this project, but the money doesn't come yet because of political circumstances. And if they choose that maybe, yeah, the more conservative new government will think that it's not so important to be clear with our history, yeah, we'll see what happens next.
But anyway, I think you are exceptional. It's very unique. I worked for some years in Ethnographic Museum in Warsaw, and I have not heard such, such topic to be touched even. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you too.
So, if there are no other opinions, comments, and congratulations. So I congratulate our speakers because of they had the most inspiring contribution to our conference and to this session. And so I close this session. Thank you very much for your participation. Yes.
Bardzo dziękuję wszystkim moderatorom sesji, wszystkim prelegentom dzisiejszego dnia i oczywiście wszystkim osobom, które uczestniczyły w naszej konferencji. Dziękujemy też słuchaczom transmisji online. Teraz mamy chwilkę przerwy, a potem zapraszam na koncert zespołu Sekunda o godzinie 18:15.